Last week, Warr's Harley in southeast London were kind enough to let me take out their Harley-Davidson Fat Bob 114 demo bike. So here are my 5 favourite things about this big monster of a machine. This is an out-and-out muscle bike, and its massive 1.86 litre Milwaukee 8 V-twin might not sound that impressive when you hear that it puts out 96 horsepower, but it's all about torque. So the 107 cubic inch version of this bike puts out 145 newton meters of torque, and this one does 155, so bags of it, and it produces it so low down. I think the peak is around 2,000 revs, so it's barely ticking over. So you can easily pull away on this bike in first gear without even touching the throttle, and then if you're cruising on the motorway or something like that, it'll just go in any gear. And when you open it up on the wider roads with sweeping bends, despite its 300 kilogram weight, there's a lot of fun to be had on this bike. I mean, immediately as the speed limit opens up here, there's absolutely no problem passing anybody on this bike. Third gear, just wind it on and you're straight past any slow driving cars like that. Woo! It's the first Harley I've ridden with the Milwaukee 8 motor, introduced in 2016, and despite how much I enjoyed the punchiness, I missed the wobble and sound of the old rubber mounted twin cam 96 motor of the previous generation Dyna Fat Bob. The new motor just sounds different. It sounds good, but for me it has a little less of the Harley character. But at least this demo bike was fitted with some snarly S&S cans. One thing I love about getting demo bikes from Warr's, I've ridden a few bikes from there before, is that they almost always put some decent silencers on their demo bikes, which everyone's going to swap them, so you may as well, so that you get a proper feel for, you know, how the bike sounds. This has got S&S on it. They sound lovely. Not too invasive when you're keeping the revs down, but as soon as you give it a bit of throttle, it's got such a throaty sound to it. And this has still got the cat in as well, so if you did want it louder, then you can definitely take it up a notch. When Harley released this model in early 2018, a spokesman said that our goal from day one was to make the Fat Bob the best handling bike in the lineup without sacrificing comfort. Some of the changes made from the previous Dyna model to this new Softail bike include a lighter, stiffer tubular steel frame, a monoshock at the rear instead of twin shocks, and an aggressive 28-degree head angle with chunky upside-down cartridge forks. But given that it still weighs in at about 300 kilos, it's not exactly something that you can chuck around on British country lanes easily, as I found out. And I did a little bit of riding to get out here on the motorway, and it does just cruise so easily, but all Harleys do, and I think the whole point of this bike is to be a bit more of a roadster within the parameters of what a Harley can be. You know, it's never going to compete with a naked, like a sports naked bike, but as a Harley this is meant to be a bit more handling and performance orientated. Whoa. You might expect some adjustability in the suspension, but as far as I can tell, it's just preload on the rear. Handily, the preload is adjustable with a knob on the side of the bike here, which I love. If you do occasionally carry a pillion but like to have it set up right for your solo riding, it's much more handy to have it located there than it is on the shocks and needing a C-spanner or something like that to do it. So that is good, but that is the only adjustment in this suspension. Monoshock on the rear, of course, with it being a soft tail, and then these chunky upside down forks on the front, and I feel like the suspension gives quite a nice ride. It's not too harsh, but it doesn't wallow or dive too much. I mean, it's a big bike, it's over 300 kilos I believe, just over, and so that does take a little bit of adjustment when you're going around sweeping bends and roundabouts and things like that. You have to set yourself up nicely for it, but generally it holds its line pretty well. I don't feel the back squatting as you accelerate out the corner. Cheers. Have we got ABS or not? I mean, it's probably not the ideal bike for country lanes like that. I did find it's quite heavy, and so I was teetering around some of those corners a little bit, but I don't think those are the roads that the designers at Harley had in mind when they said that they were hoping to make a better handling bike. I suspect it's more for the long sweeping bends, so let's find a bit of road with something a bit more like that. Yeah, it's definitely more at home here, where you can open it up a little bit. So I really enjoyed the Fat Bob once I got into my flow. It definitely corners better and sharper than the previous dyno model, and the power makes it a blast to drive out of the corners. I also thought that the braking was pretty good for a heavy bike on own brand equipment. The twin discs with 4-pot calipers up front and single 2-pot at the rear appear to be the same as the previous generation, so perhaps it's the 15 kilogram weight saving that makes them feel a bit more effective. Of course, looks are subjective and we all have our own taste, but personally I love what Harley have done with this Fat Bob. It's a move in a much more modern direction, and it looks like a precursor to some of the next generation of bikes that have been teased this year. The flat, wide LED headlight looks really similar to the initial designs for the upcoming 1250 Custom, and the Pan America Adventure bike uses a flat LED too. From what I've seen in the comments on my other videos, it's a divisive design, but for me it works, especially on the Fat Bob and the 1250 Custom. On this bike, I also love the butchness of the styling. The big forks, massive front tyre and steep front end make for a bike that really looks like it represents what the motor is about. Big and powerful. The front end is exceptionally neat, owing to the fact that the cabling runs inside the handlebars, and I also like how muted the rest of the bike is, without any chrome or polish on show, but rather a matte or brushed finish with subtle logos and graphics. It really stands out to me from the rest of the current Harley lineup, and I like the direction they're going in. But anyway, back to what Harley said, that they wanted to make a better handling bike that was still comfortable. I find this spot on, really. The bars are extremely wide and flat. Some people might like that, some might not, but the seat's got good comfort to me, and obviously a very low seat height. The foot pegs aren't really mid position. I think Dave at the shop was just telling me they're called something like rear forward or something like that. They're slightly less further forward basically than your average Harley, but all in all it makes for quite a nice position. Pillion seats, I don't generally rate that much on some of these Harleys because they slope backwards, so despite the fact that it's got that preload adjustment, which is nice and easy, it's got decent pillion pegs, it's got a strap to hold on to as well. Feedback from my pillions on Harleys has generally been it's a little difficult unless it has a sissy bar or a backrest. But for the rider sitting aboard the Fat Bob, it doesn't feel unmanageably huge, but it has that wide, laid-back position that makes you feel like you're on a muscle bike. I've also always really liked the controls and mirrors on Harleys. The switches and levers have a nice quality feel to them and a chunkiness that matches the rest of the bike. Mirrors always seem to have good visibility and also keep a relatively low profile, which doesn't look daft like some mirrors on long stalks can do on other bikes. You can also flip the mirrors under the bars at no cost if you want to keep the top line of the bike even lower. This could be a benefit to some riders or a drawback to others, but in an age where many bikes come with whizzy TFT displays, customizable rider modes, sat-nav, phone integrations, and in the case of some recent triumphs, the ability to control a GoPro, the Fat Bob is refreshingly simple. One thing it doesn't have is traction control, so despite that 155 Newton meters of torque, there's no TC, there's no rider aids at all. It's very minimal. As you can see, you've just got a little clock here with revs and speed, and yeah, there's no TFT dash or anything like that. I quite like that about it. I mean, it's a 15 grand bike, so you might expect a little more from it in the tech department, but I don't really think that's what it's about. It's a big beast of a cruiser. It's just raw power, and you've got to learn to, work with it. Traction control and rider modes might help some riders out in some scenarios, but at the end of the day, this isn't really a beginner's bike. And I get plenty of comments on other videos with riders saying that they prefer not to have all the electronics and flashiness that comes with many bikes. I see where they're coming from. For such a powerful machine, I enjoyed the fact that there's very little interference between your riding and the road. It's a simple and pure motorcycling experience. So there's my top 5 things I liked about this bike. The 114 comes in at around 15 grand, so about 5 grand more than a Sportster or a Triumph Bobber, but you get a lot more grunt than those bikes. It'll be interesting to see if the new Rocket 3 infringes on the Fat Bob's customer base, but again, that bike starts at £19,500, which isn't an insignificant difference. Thanks again to Warr's Harley in South East London for letting me demo this bike. I'd really encourage you to check out their shop. It's a beautiful showroom with loads of lovely bikes on display. Speak to Dave if you're keen to test a bike like this for yourself, and I'm sure he'll be more than happy to help. Let me know what you think of the Fat Bob in the comments below. Could you handle 300 kilograms and 155 Newton meters of torque, or is it too much for daily use? I don't think I could commute on this, but I wouldn't mind one for some weekend thrashing. A bit too big, a bit too heavy probably for those little roads, and certainly most of my riding in central London commuting, it's far too wide and cumbersome for that kind of thing. Obviously it's at home cruising on the motorway, but definitely there's a lot of fun to be had on these kinds of open sweeping roads. Hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you're new here and you want to see more like this, hit subscribe and I'll see you next time.